I'm not comfortable sometimes because when I drive, when I'm sitting somewhere, not comfortable like before.
She says the president's recent focus on the Somali community is unnerving.
What he said, we've affected all communities. We know some people, they make fraud, but not all.
For more than 3 decades, a small group of Somali immigrants in the United States lived under a special protection called Temporary Protected Status (TPS), a program created for people who fled war, insurgency, or state collapse. Somalia qualified in 1991, when the government fell apart. TPS didn't give citizenship, but it allowed its holders to stay, work, and avoid being sent back into danger. Most Americans barely knew this program existed. Even in Minnesota, home to the largest Somali community in the country, TPS holders were a quiet minority, living ordinary lives. But everything changed on November 21st, 2025, when President Donald Trump posted a sudden announcement on Truth Social. TPS for Somalis is terminated. No briefing, no warning, no explanation. And in an instant, confusion turned into fear as thousands asked, who is at risk and why now? Let's find out. For years, temporary protected status barely made it into national conversations. It was one of those quiet immigration policies that lived in the background, known to lawyers, known to the people who depended on it, but invisible to everyone else. TPS for Somalia had existed since 1991, created at a time when Somalia was collapsing into civil war and armed groups were carving up the country. The US government recognized that returning people to such chaos was impossible, so it allowed Somali nationals who were already in America to stay legally and work without fear of deportation. By 2025, TPS had been renewed again and again because Somalia never truly stabilized. Al-Shabaab continued bombing cities. The government could not guarantee basic safety. Civilians remained targets. Yet TPS holders were a tiny population, numbering only a few hundred across the whole country, about 500 in Minnesota. Most of Minnesota's nearly 80,000 Somalis were US citizens, green card holders, refugees, students, workers, and business owners. TPS was the smallest piece of the puzzle, and that is exactly why nobody expected what happened next. On November 21st, 2025, everything changed in a single moment, not through legislation, not through a White House briefing, but through a Truth Social post. At 9:14 a.m., without warning, President Donald Trump declared that TPS for Somalia was terminated effective immediately, citing Somali gang activity, missing billions linked to fraud, and money laundering networks he claimed were operating inside the United States. The message exploded across Minnesota before anyone had time to interpret it. Screens lit up in classrooms, on buses, in grocery stores, in apartment halls, in mosques. It didn't matter that only a few hundred people actually held TPS. The language of the announcement was broad, accusing, and unsettling. It didn't distinguish between TPS holders and the 80,000 Somali Minnesotans who had nothing to do with the decision. It was painted in sweeping strokes, and for a community already used to political targeting, the effect was immediate. Fear doesn't wait for legal clarifications. Fear doesn't read footnotes. Fear reacts to tone. Within minutes, panic rippled through Cedar Riverside, St. Cloud, Mankato, Rochester, and every Somali-populated neighborhood in the state. People left work early. Teachers noticed students staring at their phones instead of their lessons. Elders sat in silence trying to understand what was happening. Lawyers' offices filled so quickly that waiting rooms spilled into hallways. And no one knew whether the announcement meant deportation vans could start rolling out tonight or whether it was just political theater. Was the president talking about 500 people or 80,000? Was he talking about TPS holders only or the entire Somali community? No one knew. That uncertainty, more than the announcement itself, is what shook Minnesota. And the central question that hung in the air that morning was the one nobody could answer. Who exactly was Donald Trump targeting? And what did immediately terminated actually mean?
People that shouldn't be in our country this week.
So you announced that asylum.
And that includes Somalians and it includes plenty of others.
The confusion in Minnesota intensified because nobody knew who immediately terminated referred to. Families didn't know if they should pack documents, call lawyers, or keep their children home from school. Some imagined federal agents targeting whole neighborhoods. Others thought their citizenship was suddenly in question. It took several hours before immigration attorneys and community leaders could even begin explaining who was actually affected. And that's when the first surprising truth emerged. Trump's announcement was about a tiny group, not the community at large. TPS holders are not 80,000 people. They're not 20,000 people. They aren't thousands at all. They are roughly 430 to 700 Somalis in the entire United States, with around 500 in Minnesota. These are people who happened to be in America when Somalia descended into extreme insurgency in the early 1990s. TPS didn't allow them citizenship. It didn't give them permanent residency. It simply let them stay and work legally, because sending them back during a war would have been a death sentence. Yet as small as this group is, it holds enormous emotional weight. These are parents, uncles, aunties, and elders, people deeply integrated into Minnesota's Somali neighborhoods. Many of them raised American-born children. Many have not set foot in Somalia for 30 years. Some fled when militants controlled their towns. Others lost family members to bombings. TPS may be a small category on paper, but in real life, each TPS holder is connected to dozens of relatives, friends, co-workers, and community members. So when Trump ended TPS with a single sentence, the fear was not limited to 500 people. It spread to thousands who realized how fragile the safety of their loved ones might be. What made things worse was the way Trump framed the decision. Instead of discussing Somalia's conditions or the humanitarian basis of TPS, he focused on accusations of Somali gang activity, welfare fraud, and alleged billions disappearing through money laundering schemes. Whether these claims were verified or politically exaggerated didn't matter at that moment. They made the entire community feel accused. They made TPS holders sound like criminals. And once crime is mentioned, fear takes on a different life. In restaurants and mosques, people whispered, "Are they targeting us because of these accusations?" In community centers, elders asked whether citizens could be questioned too. But beneath the panic, a quieter truth was still missing. One that most people didn't know yet. One that would completely change the way they understood the announcement. Because even if Trump intended to end TPS immediately, could TPS actually be terminated on the spot? Or was the announcement hiding a legal limit he didn't mention? The panic in Minnesota grew because people assumed the president's announcement was final, immediate, and enforceable on the spot. But as attorneys and immigration advocates rushed to respond, a critical truth emerged. A truth that completely shifted the tone of the conversation. TPS cannot legally end overnight. Even the President of the United States cannot snap his fingers and avoid it. Temporary protected status is bound by federal law, not political mood. And federal law requires a precise process. The Department of Homeland Security must publish a formal termination notice. It must give at least 60 days of warning. It must prove that Somalia is now safe enough for people to return. Trump mentioned none of this in his announcement. He left out the legal steps, the timeline, the humanitarian criteria, and the fact that Somalia's conditions remain unstable. Instead, he framed the sudden termination as if it took effect the moment he pressed post. But attorneys knew what many community members didn't. Somalia is nowhere near meeting the safety standards required for TPS termination. Al-Shabaab remains powerful and increasingly aggressive. Government control is limited outside major cities. Civilian deaths are still reported monthly. Humanitarian agencies consistently warn that return is unsafe. In fact, analysts across the political spectrum agree. Somalia is unstable in 2025 for the same reasons it was unstable in 1991. This creates a legal contradiction. For TPS to end, the U.S. government must demonstrate that conditions have fundamentally improved. But Somalia's conditions have not improved. They have in many cases worsened. That contradiction is the foundation for lawsuits that are now inevitable. Immigration rights groups are already preparing to argue that Trump's termination violates the underlying humanitarian purpose of TPS. CAIR and other organizations have stated publicly that the decision appears politically motivated, driven by Islamophobic narratives rather than objective assessments of Somalia's security. And courts tend to look closely at such discrepancies. Federal judges halted TPS terminations under Trump's previous administration because the moves appeared rushed, discriminatory, or improperly justified. This time, advocates expect the legal fight to be just as fierce. Injunctions are likely. Delays are almost guaranteed. Yet even with the law on their side, the Somali community in Minnesota wasn't relieved. Because legal protections don't erase emotional fear. Legal timelines don't calm children who hear the word deportation. Court procedures don't undo the sting of being associated with gangs, fraud, or missing billions in a national headline. And that's why, even after learning that deportations couldn't start overnight, anxiety didn't disappear. Instead, it shifted into a new kind of fear, the fear of what this announcement really meant on a deeper symbolic level. If this wasn't just about law and not just about TPS holders, then what was Trump really signaling to Minnesota's Somali community? Why did this announcement feel like a direct attack on identity, not just immigration status? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. The fear that spread across Minnesota wasn't only about TPS or legal status. For many Somali families, the announcement felt like something deeper, a signal that the country they had rebuilt their lives was suddenly questioning their presence, their contribution, and their identity. And that's why Trump's post hit harder than any previous policy debate. It didn't read like a technical update, it read like a public indictment. Somalis in Minnesota have spent decades becoming part of the state's fabric. They run businesses, drive taxis, teach in schools, serve in hospitals, and win elections. They've built mosques, malls, community centers, and neighborhoods known across the Midwest. Yet all of that disappeared in one sentence that linked Somalis with gangs, fraud, and billions missing. Even though the accusations were aimed at a small number of cases, the wording blurred every line that separates individuals from an entire community. In Cedar Riverside, elders said the announcement felt like a shadow over everyone. In St. Cloud, parents voiced fears that their children would be treated differently at school the next day. Young professionals with U.S. citizenship asked whether employers and co-workers would see them differently after the president's claims. The sting wasn't only in the policy, it was in the implication. Because when a president uses broad language to connect an ethnic group with crime, the target is never just the policy group. The target becomes the community itself. This is why lawyers and advocates insisted on publicly correcting misinformation. TPS holders are not criminals. TPS holders are not responsible for billions in fraud. TPS holders are not the cause of gang activity. But narrative spreads faster than fact, and the narrative that Trump's announcement created made many Somali Americans feel as though they were suddenly being placed under suspicion simply because of their heritage. And then there was the fear of mixed-status families. Families where one person is a citizen, one is a green card holder, one is a refugee, and one relies on TPS. In these households, no one sleeps easily when one member's fate is uncertain. The threat to one feels like a threat to all. This is why the emotional impact of TPS termination extended far beyond the limited number of TPS holders. It was never just about them, it was about the fragile balance that holds families together. Even Somali youth, born and raised in Minnesota, felt shaken. They wondered if their citizenship still protected them socially, culturally, and psychologically when the highest office in the country spoke of their community in such sweeping, negative terms. For many, the announcement revived old fears of being treated as perpetual outsiders, no matter how American their lives truly were. The community felt targeted because the language targeted them. TPS was only the Ting star point. The real wound was rhetorical. But amid fear, confusion, and frustration, one question became impossible to ignore. How would the Somali community respond, quietly or with organized strength? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The Somali community in Minnesota has seen political storms before, but this time the response was immediate and organized. The fear was real, yes, but so was the determination. Within hours of Trump's announcement, Community leaders, lawyers, imams, activists, and local officials activated a network that has taken decades to build. They knew silence would only deepen confusion, so they chose action. The first move was information. Mosques announced emergency gatherings. Community centers opened their doors late into the night. Lawyers held rapid-fire sessions explaining the truth. TPS cannot end instantly. No one can be deported without due process, and families should stay calm while the legal steps unfold. Imams structured Friday sermons around the theme of staying united and alert, reminding people that rights don't disappear because of a social media post. Next came legal mobilization. Immigration attorneys began drafting challenges within hours, preparing to argue that Somalia remains unsafe and that the justification for termination was flawed. National organizations, CAIR, NILC, ACLU, signaled that if DHS moved forward with formal termination, lawsuits would follow immediately. They had beaten similar attempts before, and they were ready to do it again. Advocates also worked to counter misinformation. Volunteers corrected exaggerated YouTube claims, clarified numbers, and reminded everyone that the 80,000 Somali Minnesotans are not losing status. Schools received guidance on how to support anxious students. Social workers checked on elderly community members who were confused by the announcement. Then came the emotional response: unity. Families gathered in living rooms to talk openly about fears. Neighbors checked on each other. Community elders offered reassurance to the younger generation, telling them this was not the first time Somali identity had been politicized, and each time they had survived it. This organized resistance didn't erase the fear, but it replaced paralysis with purpose. The narrative shifted from "what will happen to us" to "here's what we do next." Even TPS holders themselves expressed determination. Many said openly that they would fight for their right to stay, not hiding, not retreating, but standing firm. But beneath the strength, one reality still lingered. Legal battles take time, and outcomes are never guaranteed. Even with community unity, national advocacy, and strong humanitarian arguments, TPS could still end if courts don't intervene. And if that happens, the consequences won't be abstract or symbolic. They will be deeply human and painfully personal. Because while community organization can stop panic, it cannot erase the hardest question of all. If every lawsuit fails and TPS truly ends, what future awaits the Somali Minnesotans who depend on it to stay in the only home they've known for decades? If every legal challenge fails, and TPS for Somalis truly ends, Minnesota will face a human crisis disguised as an administrative decision. For the several hundred TPS holders who have built decades of life in the state, the end of this protection would not simply mean filling out new paperwork or finding a different visa category. It would mean confronting an impossible choice: leave the country they have lived in longer than the country they were born in, or remain in legal limbo, hoping for another political shift that may or may not come in time. Most of these individuals arrived in America more than 20 or 30 years ago. They survived war, famine, displacement, and the collapse of a government that still has not fully recovered. They raised American-born children. They worked long hours. They became part of Minnesota's social fabric. For them, going back is not a realistic option. Somalia is not the place they left, and even the place they remember no longer exists in the same form. Many have no homes to return to, no family waiting, no safety guaranteed. For TPS holders with American children, the question becomes even more painful. Do they take their U.S. citizen sons and daughters into a country ravaged by insecurity, or do they leave them behind in the care of relatives? There is no good answer to that question. Each option carries trauma, and this is where the full weight of Trump's announcement becomes clear. The number affected may be small, but the emotional, cultural, and psychological impact is enormous. TPS holders are often anchors within extended families: the aunt who watches the children, the uncle who works 2 jobs to support relatives, the elder who keeps traditions alive. Removing them isn't just the removal of an individual, it unravels the stability of entire households. Even for those who are not TPS holders, the pain would spread. Children in Minnesota schools would see classmates suddenly disappear. Employers would lose longtime workers. Mosques would lose familiar faces. Neighborhoods would lose mentors, role models, and elders. And perhaps the deepest wound of all, Somali Minnesotans would be forced to confront the fear that their place in American society can be shaken by a single announcement. No matter how long they've lived here, worked here, or contributed here, still, despite the uncertainty, one truth remains. Somali Minnesotans have never backed down quietly. They fought for stability when they had none. They built a community where there was none. And now, once again, they will stand together, not just for TPS holders, but for the dignity of their entire community. So the final question is no longer about law or policy. It's about identity, belonging, and the future. Will America recognize the humanity of those who have already built their lives here? Let us know in the comment section. Will Minnesota witness the most painful separation its Somali community has ever faced? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.